The crystal chandelier above the Hargrove Grand Ballroom in downtown Charleston, South Carolina, had witnessed many things over its 100-year history: lavish weddings, political dinners, quiet betrayals disguised as handshakes. But on a rainy Tuesday evening in late autumn, it would witness something far more extraordinary: a young woman with flowers still dusted beneath her fingernails standing her ground against one of the most powerful men in America, while an entire room held its breath. Margaret Calloway was 26 years old, and she had been working double shifts at the Hargrove for 11 months straight. Not because she loved the smell of starched linen or the choreography of fine dining, though she had grown to appreciate both. She worked those shifts because her mother, Patricia, was 3 months into chemotherapy, and the bills didn't care about that. The bills never did. Margaret had the kind of tired that lived behind the eyes, the permanent, quiet kind that no amount of sleep could fix. But she showed up every single night with her dark hair pinned neatly, her gray uniform pressed, and a determination that her supervisor, a kind older man named Gerald, privately called the most professional thing he had ever seen in 40 years in the hospitality business. If you believe that kindness still exists in this world, that one ordinary person can change a room full of people, please like this video, leave a comment below, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to this channel. Stories like this one are why we're here. Richard Voss was 53 years old and worth approximately $4.7 billion, depending on which quarter you checked. He had built his fortune in commercial real estate, absorbing smaller companies the way a storm absorbs smaller clouds, completely and without apology. He was not a man who had been told no very often, and on the rare occasions he had simply found another way to get what he wanted. He arrived at the Hargrove that evening with 3 associates and the particular energy of someone who expected the world to rearrange itself around his comfort. The maitre d' seated him at the best table immediately, the way everyone always did, and Richard didn't thank him. He never thanked anyone. Gratitude, in his experience, suggested that you needed something from someone. Richard Voss did not need anything from anyone. The evening began to unravel almost immediately. Richard sent back his water because there was a single small ice cube too many. He criticized the bread as though it had personally offended him. When a young busboy named Thomas accidentally grazed his sleeve while reaching to refill a glass, Richard's voice cut across the quiet elegance of the dining room like something cold and sharp, loud enough that 3 nearby tables fell silent. He told Thomas, in precise and humiliating detail, exactly how incompetent he was. Thomas was 17 years old and had been saving money for community college. His face turned the color of the red roses on every table, and he walked quickly toward the kitchen, eyes down, jaw tight, doing everything in his power not to cry in front of one of Charleston's most powerful men. Every server in the room saw it. Every diner within earshot heard it. And every single person, the sommelier, the floor manager, the couple celebrating their anniversary 2 tables over, looked away. Because that was what you did with men like Richard Voss. You looked away. You let it pass. You told yourself it wasn't your business, or that it wasn't worth the trouble, or that people like him always eventually got what they deserved without you having to be the one to say so out loud. Margaret Calloway had been carrying a plate of sea bass to the adjacent table when she heard it. She stopped walking. Something shifted in her chest, not rage, exactly, but something older and more fundamental than rage. She thought of her mother lying in a hospital recliner with a needle in her arm, still asking Margaret how her shifts were going, still apologizing for being a burden, still saying please and thank you to every single nurse who walked through the door. Patricia Calloway, who had worked as a school cafeteria aide for 22 years and never once made a child feel small for not having lunch money. The contrast between that image and the man sitting 10 feet away from her was so vast that Margaret felt it physically, like a drop in temperature. She delivered the sea bass. She smoothed her apron. And then she walked to Richard Voss's table. She didn't raise her voice. That was the thing people would talk about afterward, that she never once raised her voice. She stood beside his table and she spoke to him the way you speak to someone when you have decided that the truth matters more than your own comfort, more than your job security, more than the entire intimidating weight of wealth and power he carried into every room. She told him that Thomas was a teenager doing his best in a difficult job, and that what he had just done to that boy in front of a room full of people was not acceptable. She told him that she understood he was accustomed to a certain standard of service, and that the Hargrove would always strive to meet that standard, but that the standard of basic human decency ran in both directions. She said it all calmly, clearly, and without breaking eye contact once. The dining room had gone absolutely still. Richard Voss stared at her for a long moment. His associates stared at her. The couple celebrating their anniversary stared at her. Gerald, her supervisor, had appeared at the edge of the room and stood frozen, certain he was about to witness the end of Margaret's career at the Hargrove and possibly in hospitality altogether. Something happened in Richard Voss's face then, something that the people watching couldn't quite name, because they had never seen it there before. It moved through his expression like weather, brief and complicated. Later, some of them would say it looked like recognition. Others would say it looked, improbably, like shame. He didn't erupt. He didn't demand a manager. He set down his fork very carefully, and he was quiet for what felt like a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost something, some particular hardness it had carried all evening. He asked Margaret her name. She told him. He nodded slowly, and then he asked if she could send Thomas back out to the floor. When Thomas returned, uncertain and still visibly shaken, Richard Voss looked directly at him and said that he had behaved badly and he was sorry. 5 words that Richard Voss had perhaps not said aloud, in that combination, in longer than he could honestly remember. Thomas blinked. The room exhaled. Before Richard left that evening, he stopped Gerald near the entrance and told him that Margaret Calloway was exceptional, and that she deserved to know it. Then he left a tip that would cover 2 weeks of Margaret's salary, with a handwritten note tucked beneath the edge of the plate that said simply, "Your mother raised you right. I hope she gets well soon." No one ever knew how he found out about Patricia. Some things in life resist explanation, and perhaps that is exactly as it should be. Margaret stood in the parking lot after her shift ended, in the cold Charleston air, and read that note 3 times. She didn't cry until she got to her car. Then she cried for a long time, for her mother, for Thomas, for every exhausted and invisible person who had ever smiled politely while someone treated them as though they were less than human. And she cried, too, for the unexpected grace of discovering that sometimes people are capable of more than the worst version of themselves. Speech balloon. Before we reach the end, drop 1 word in the comments right now that describes how this story made you feel. Just 1 word. We read every single one. Gerald never asked Margaret to explain herself. He simply scheduled her the best shifts for the following month and said nothing more about it. Thomas finished his first year of community college the following fall, on a scholarship fund that had been quietly established in his name. And Margaret's mother, Patricia, finished her final round of chemotherapy in the spring, and the first thing she did when she came home was sit at the kitchen table and ask her daughter to tell her everything she had missed. There are moments in ordinary life that don't look like turning points until you're standing on the other side of them. Margaret Calloway was not a hero in any dramatic sense. She was a tired young woman who simply decided, in one quiet moment beneath a crystal chandelier, that silence had a cost she was no longer willing to pay.